Chapter 30, Razorwing's Gift. Razorwing was staring down and continuously punching a tree out of frustration. He was so confused and angry because he didn't understand why Lockjaw would just let the soldiers go after what they did. He understood that they were his previous companions, but they were now his sworn enemies. He tried to sympathize by imagining if his own current team betrayed and tried to hurt him. However, he came to the conclusion that he still wouldn't let them go without a fight. The bark on the tree was completely shredded, and the inner core of the tree was cracking now. His thoughts raced from topic to topic, all of them eventually leading back to Saberclaw. He wondered why she let Lockjaw decide the soldier's fate, and if she was content with his actions. Lockjaw was a very annoying and upsetting character in Razorwing's life. The robot was not trustworthy in Razorwing's perspective and could easily stab the Sentiron in the back. Razorwing half expected such a thing to happen. He silently wished that Lockjaw had never existed, because if it wasn't for him, none of this would have happened. He was also jealous of Lockjaw because before him, Razorwing was beginning to get really close to Saberclaw and was making connections. Now, all Saberclaw talked about was Lockjaw and trying to decode his intentions. Lockjaw was also rude to only Razorwing. He was insanely cordial to Silver Spot and was clearly biased to Saberclaw. But when it came to Razorwing, it was like Lockjaw had decided to throw out all kindness. Suddenly, Razorwing heard Silver Spot's voice and movement behind him. He turned and saw Lockjaw's hand lightly brushing over Saberclaw's metal forehead and Silver Spot moving her finger over Saberclaw's eyes. He walked over cautiously, wondering what was going on until he saw Saberclaw's glowing eyes wide open. Silver Spot spoke slowly. "Follow my finger and focus." "Can you see clearly?" she asked as Razorwing approached them. Saberclaw's weak whisper responded, "I can see fine, Silver." She seemed to be in a bad mood, but was appreciative towards Silver Spot. Razorwing felt happiness engulf him when he saw Saberclaw move Silver Spot's hand out of her face. He smiled and asked, "How are you, Saber?" He crouched beside Silver Spot and awaited Saberclaw's response. Saberclaw huffed and answered, "I'm fine, just tired and my arm hurts." "Ugh, why is it always me getting poisoned and stuff?" she asked, clearly annoyed. She sat up and clenched her still bleeding arm. Lockjaw chuckled, but Silver Spot frowned. Razorwing shrugged as Silver Spot answered with determination, "Because Rebay sees you as more of a threat compared to the rest of us. Now, don't push yourself because I had to drain the poison out of you, and you lost an insane amount of G that needs time to replenish." She gestured towards Lockjaw and reached inside her box of tools. "Lockjaw, do you need some G? You look exhausted and I brought plenty." She pulled out a syringe filled with blue-green, glowing liquid. Lockjaw waved his hands in front of him. No, I could definitely use a refill, but Saberclaw needs it more than me." He tried to refuse Silver Spot's offer, but she held out the syringe towards him. "Lockjaw, don't be silly. I have her covered, and you need some as well. Take it." Silver Spot shoved the syringe into Lockjaw's palm and closed his scarred fingers around it. Lockjaw sighed, raising the syringe to his upper arm and injecting the G into himself. He instantly felt more energized and content, thanking Silver Spot silently. Silver Spot once again replaced the pouch of G that was injecting liquid into Saberclaw's arm. Saberclaw sighed and let her head fall to the side with aggravation. "So, what exactly happened since we will probably be here for a while? I noticed the next Hari got hit by the dart thing, then blacked out. That's all I know. Wait, no. I also woke up again for a few seconds and saved Lockjaw's tail." She asked with annoyed curiosity as she smirked and Lockjaw looked away with shame. Razorwing answered before anyone else could. "Lockjaw scared off the next Hari, letting them live. Then Silver Spot and I arrived and she saved you." Silver Spot's head snapped toward Razorwing and she stared daggers into him, sensing his purposefully bad description of the event. Lockjaw squinted at Razorwing with frustrated confusion and began, "That is very much not what happened. You skipped the majority of what actually occurred, Razorwing. You weren't even here for the battle." He shook his head in disapproval as Razorwing rolled his eyes. Razorwing fidgeted as Lockjaw looked Saberclaw in the optics. His eyes softened as he held her hand. Well, you didn't exactly black out. More like you went into a trance. The soldiers attacked, and I had to fight all 6 of them at once to protect you. You saved me by taking out one of them. You hurled your dagger when he was seconds away from ending me. Remember? He asked. Silver Spot, listening intently, was amazed at Lockjaw's bravery, but she didn't show it. Saberclaw gasped and answered, Yeah, I do remember that, and I still don't think you ever thanked me for it. She smirked as Lockjaw waved her off, thanking her reluctantly. He continued, Anyway, 2 of them were killed and 1 severely injured during the battle. As Razorwing said, I did give the rest the option to either continue fighting me and risk their lives or retreat. They chose to leave, and I let them go. But I promise I had good reason, Saber. They were my only friends when I fought for Rebay, and I felt I owed it to them. I felt like it wouldn't be right to slaughter them like some other enemy. His head bowed with guilt, but he felt a weak hand touch the side of his face and lift his head back up. He locked eyes with Saberclaw as she smiled gently. Lockjaw, I'm glad you let them go. It shows me that you have morals and self-control. Don't you ever feel guilty for not hurting others in a blind act of revenge? It's not healthy. She grinned, and he chuckled in response. He put his hand over hers as she held his face. His hand was almost twice the size of hers, so it completely covered the green metal. Razorwing's face fell into an angry expression because he was originally sure that Saberclaw would be furious at Lockjaw for not avenging her. Saberclaw removed her hand from Lockjaw's face and looked back at Silver Spot. I feel fine. Can we go back to the hangar? She asked. Her tone sounded much happier. Silver Spot sighed and smiled. Fine. Since you won't stop bugging me about it, we can go. Lockjaw, make sure you support her so she doesn't pass out. Saberclaw, can you fly? She asked as Lockjaw wrapped his arms around Saberclaw. She sighed and held on to his shoulder, causing him to wince, but he didn't mind. He lifted her enough to where she barely had to walk on her own, but she still had to support some of her weight on her armored feet. Saberclaw rested her head on Lockjaw's shoulder, and he gently helped her walk. She looked up at Silver Spot and said, I don't think so, but I can walk. I know for sure that Lockjaw can't fly. Look at his wing. She pointed to Lockjaw's drooping wing and tried to put a little more pressure on her own legs. Silver Spot let her head tilt to the side a little as she turned around and began walking. All right then. It seems I will have my hands full when we arrive back at the hangar. She tapped Razorwing, signaling their movement and snapping him back to reality. He caught up to Silver Spot and walked between her and the other 2. Saberclaw still kept her arms stretched over Lockjaw's shoulders, holding herself up, but she occasionally put more and more of her weight on her own 2 feet. Lockjaw was thoroughly enjoying this and smiled the entire time. Razorwing just glared at them and tried to forget about his growing anger as he rolled his eyes. They walked through the trees, and the birds sang around them. The day was ending. It seemed, in this area, the birds were loudest at dusk and dawn, hence their chirping as the sun went down. Saberclaw, feeling confident about her own strength, released herself from Lockjaw's grip. He let her try to walk on her own, but didn't stray far from her side, just in case. Silver Spot looked back at the 3 robots and thought about their futures. She had a feeling that not all of them would survive the upcoming events. She felt they were ready, but they were still young, and Rebay was very powerful. They would need her guidance if they had hope of victory. She knew that in situations like this one, some came out stronger, and those who didn't adapt fail to come out at all. It was simply a matter of who was strong enough to endure and who wasn't. She also thought about Ironstripe. He was a powerful being who has proven his strength and the fact that he could easily destroy a single Sentiron warrior. The only being on the Sentiron team that Ironstripe couldn't, or better yet, wouldn't destroy, was Silver Spot. She still held a place in his heart, and she felt that fact would protect her like it had in the past. This thought made her feel like she was using him, and it made her ashamed, but it was the only way since she would never be able to forgive him after what he had done. After all, the first things known to Ironstripe were Silver Spot and the act of murder. She originally tried to reason with herself, thinking that he was simply didn't know any better, but she thought better of it. Iron Stripe was a very experienced Sentiron with willpower that definitely allowed him to have deep thoughts about his choices, especially ones as big as becoming a traitor or not. To be fair, however, Silver Spot was technically a traitor as well. However, she had good reason. Now that Silver Spot thought of such things, she realized that she wasn't the only traitor. Lockjaw had technically betrayed Rebay as well, and Saberclaw had. Razorwing, for some reason, had never been under mind control or ever been on Rebay's side. This actually made Silver Spot chuckle because the majority of the team were technically traitors to someone. However, Rebay isn't exactly someone that anyone should be loyal to. In fact, it would be great if more people betrayed her. Silver Spot heard lots of movement behind her. There was no longer Saberclaw's labored, heavy steps, but instead there was the steady snapping of twigs. She turned to see Saberclaw struggling, but managing to walk on her own. Silver Spot clapped a little and said, "Good. I thought it would take a lot longer for you to recover so much." She watched Saberclaw for a few minutes until she noticed the strained smile on Saberclaw's face. Then, she turned and continued walking, gently moving branches out of her way as she moved towards the hangar. Razorwing had his hands low, ready to support Saberclaw if she needed it. Saberclaw held her arms out, steadying herself. Wow, this feels like learning how to walk all over again. She fell a little, almost sending Lockjaw into a panic because he thought she had passed out. Lockjaw's metal brows tensed with concern. "Are you sure that you can walk on your own? You seem unsteady." He inched closer to her, ready to grab her if he needed to. Saberclaw waved him off. "I'm fine, Lockjaw." "You too, Razorwing. I see you over there looking like you desperately want to grab me." She laughed as her steps gradually got steadier. Razorwing ignored Saberclaw's command and spotted a structure in the distance. It was made of metal and was worn down over time. It looked like it had been there for years, but still seemed lively with plant life like nature had taken it back. Razorwing, assuming no one would notice that he had left, began veering away from the group and towards the mysterious structure. The front wall was still standing, but the door must have fallen off of the hinges because there was just a bare doorway. Razorwing ducked and entered the structure. The doorway was definitely not a good size for Sentiron use, but Razorwing managed to shorten himself just enough to fit. He looked inside and saw the unusual furniture layout and beaten walls. Dust layered the wooden floor that barely held his weight, and there were human-sized chairs lining the walls. Razorwing looked around the large, one-room house and saw a large fenced-off area with sand covering the floor. The fence was basically just wood planks stacked as high as a human waist height. He looked inside the fence and saw two long chains. One was on one corner of the square, arena-looking place, and the other was on the opposite corner. Razorwing stepped over the wall of wood and walked into the sand-filled pit, kneeling to observe the chains. The floor creaked as he shifted his weight from one side to the other. He picked up one of the chains and fidgeted with it, moving it from one side of his palm to the other. He observed the unique shine of the silver-colored chain and the length of it. It was just long enough to fit around a Sentiron's neck, and a pleasant thought came to Razorwing's mind. He imagined the chain shining around Saberclaw's neck as the silence of the room let his imagination run wild. He looked around and thought about what in the world this pit was used for. Then he remembered something that Sam had once said. This area was once known for its famous dog fighting contests. Sam had described historical K9 fights in this area while walking through the woods with a group one day. Razorwing shook his head at the thought of poor dogs covered in scars being forced to fight each other until one was either dead or too injured to continue just for human entertainment. Humans could be terrible creatures at times, but they were still worth protecting. Razorwing examined the ends of the chain and realized that it could easily be connected if the ends were melted together. Razorwing brought out his blaster and activated it. He simply made it glow with immense heat without actually firing anything. He brought the ends, one before the other, towards the heat of the blaster and watched them turn white with heat and melt. He gently connected the chain ends, and they melted into each other, creating an imperfect chain neck piece. He wasn't sure what metal the chain was made out of but he assumed it was steel because it quickly cooled within a few minutes. He held the chain up in front of his face and observed its shimmer. He stood back up, feeling accomplished, and put his blaster away. Razorwing once again stepped over the wooden wall and ducked through the doorway. The bright sunlight struck and warmed his armor instantly as he stepped out of the building. He could stand up fully, and he didn't realize how much he took this ability for granted until this very minute. He sighed with contentment as he clenched his fists around the metal chain. Razorwing heard crashing beside him, but he looked too late and felt a metal body smack into him. His head hit the dirt hard, and his entire body was sprawled over the ground. He raised his fist and was about to hit whoever had attacked him before he realized who it was. The sun created a perfect shadow that concealed who it was until they leaned forward and spoke into his face. "Razorwing, you had me worried. I thought you had been captured or something. Never do that again," he heard Saberclaw exclaim from on top of him. Saberclaw's face was inches away from his, and her knee was practically shoved into his chin. Her leg had him pinned on the ground, and he heard Lockjaw's and Silverspot's laughs. He grunted and let his head fall back to the ground as he said, "I thought you were struggling to walk not even 30 minutes ago. Why did you jump on me?" he asked as Saberclaw got off of him. She stretched out her hand in offering and grabbed his hand, helping him to his feet again. "I don't know, it felt right at the time. Also, I'm feeling a lot better." She sounded happy and excited, and this made Razorwing smile. Razorwing saw Silverspot walk behind Saberclaw and put her hand on the green robot's shoulder. "Yeah, this one shouldn't be jumping on anyone. You may have recovered a little, Saberclaw, but please don't push yourself. We already had a scare like that with that one." She jokingly glared at Lockjaw, and he put his hands up in front of him innocently. Lockjaw shook his head as Razorwing chuckled at him. Saberclaw moved her head a little to see around Razorwing, glancing at the building and silently telling herself that it probably didn't matter. She looked over Razorwing again and noticed a gleam coming from his clenched fist. "Hey, what's that?" she asked. Razorwing squinted in confusion as he followed her gaze. He rose his hand and opened his fist, revealing the shiny chain. "It's something I wanted to give you. It's a necklace." He smiled as he said this, and Saberclaw tilted her head. She reached out her hand to take it, but he lowered it with his and lifted the necklace up to her head. Saberclaw, sensing what he was trying to do, lowered her head to make it easier on him. Razorwing slid the chain over Saberclaw's head, and it perfectly adjusted itself around the thin neck armor. It sat on Saberclaw's neck, and she ran her hands over it as it gleamed. "Whoa, I don't know what to say, Razorwing. It's beautiful. Where did you get it?" she asked as her eyes reflected the shine of the chain. Razorwing smiled and vaguely answered, "I have my ways. I'm glad you like it." He shifted his weight on one leg and puffed out his metal chest a little as he watched Silverspot observe the necklace from close up. He looked over at Lockjaw and expected to see a jealous expression, but Lockjaw was just watching Saberclaw's face in awe. Razorwing interpreted this as a badly hidden jealousy, but in reality, that wasn't the case. Lockjaw didn't feel too happy about the fact that Razorwing had gifted something to Saberclaw with such attitudes, but he chose to dismiss it as a cordial gift. Lockjaw watched Saberclaw closely. The chain seemed to highlight her features, and it clearly made her happy, and that was all that he cared about. He walked closer, observing her joyful body language and letting her happiness intoxicate him. He carefully maneuvered himself past Silverspot. Silverspot, having forgotten that Lockjaw was even there because of his silence, watched him carefully. One thought went through her mind as Lockjaw got closer to Saberclaw and Razorwing. Lockjaw isn't going to like this. She misinterpreted his body language as jealous anger as he took slightly heavy steps between Saberclaw and Razorwing. Lockjaw approached Saberclaw, and she noticed his mood as well. She looked up at him with slight nervousness shining in her optics. Razorwing frowned, but refused to back away. Lockjaw didn't step between Saberclaw and Razorwing, just positioned himself beside her. Saberclaw felt her nervousness spike when she felt Lockjaw's hand on her back. Lockjaw looked down and twirled the chain in his fingers. "Yes, it is a very beautiful piece of jewelry." "Oh," And thanks for making it harder to not look at Saberclaw, Razor. He glanced up at Razorwing before pulling Saberclaw closer. Razorwing had never been called Razor before, but it felt natural, so he allowed it. He also didn't like how Lockjaw worded his thank, but he chose to ignore it for everyone else's sake. Saberclaw felt herself being forced towards Lockjaw's large frame, but didn't fight it. Her wings drooped in submission, and Lockjaw let go of the chain, looking her in the eyes and smirking as if he had won her. Saberclaw saw the bright blue glow of his optics and felt her body begin to shake nervously, so she moved away from Lockjaw and forced him to let go of her. She felt uncomfortable being so close to Lockjaw, but she still wanted to stand near him. Her wings moved back to their original position as she became comfortable again. An awkward silence followed, but Silver Spot felt relieved. She was glad that she wouldn't have to break up another fight between Lockjaw and Razorwing. This was actually a good sign that the two might actually be gaining the ability to tolerate each other. Lockjaw smiled at Saberclaw, and she felt a large number of fuzzy feelings engulf her. Silverspit broke the silence and turned her back on the other three. Well, shall we continue on our way? We are almost there. She noted that the walk had already taken about 30 minutes and remembered that, if she had her coordinates accurate, then they should have a 5-minute walk until they reach their destination. Silver Spot ignored the shocked faces of the others and continued walking with a smug expression. Saberclaw jogged up to Silver Spot and walked beside her because she wanted a break from the two robots behind her. This forced Lockjaw and Razorwing to walk in a single file line behind the two ahead of them as they wove through the trees. Both robots silently agreed that it would be too awkward to walk beside each other, so Razorwing walked behind Lockjaw instead of beside him. Please like and subscribe, and tell me if you like the story so far in the comments.